Welcome to the On the Pen podcast with your host, Dave Knapp.
Welcome to this Tuesday, September 9th edition of On the Pen, the weekly dose podcast. I am your host, Dave Knapp, man on the Mounjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Mounjaro, Zepbound, compound that pen. It's literally what we talk about each and every week here at On the Pen. And this week we've got a banger for you. Compounded GLP-1s are under the FDA microscope. Novo Nordisk is looking more seriously at your gut health. Eli Lilly is reaching for the gene therapy moon, and now patients, that's you and me in the OTP community, are actually taking CVS Caremark to court for forcing the switch from Zepbound to Wegovy. And today we're going to unpack all of that and what it means for you, the patients, because that's what we do, is we bring you patient-centric obesity medicine news, empowering you to have more competent and confident conversations with your medical providing team. So this past week, you may have seen this elsewhere. The FDA released a report on the state of pharmaceutical quality as it relates to compounded medications. And this was a big one. Now, depending on what your specific interests may serve, you may have interpreted this differently. I saw doctors that can't stand compounded medications who were saying this is vindication. I saw people who were vehemently pro compound in all cases, ways, shapes, and forms say this is an indication that compounds are never going away. We have our own take and our own opinion on it, but for the purposes of this podcast, what we wanted to do is we wanted to break it down for you in terms of what this actually means for safety, for the supply, for price, and the quality of GLP-1 compounds. So that's what we're going to get into first and foremost. You can see here's the article, the report that actually came from the FDA. We're actually going to list this and post it on today's podcast rundown that we will post over on our Substack. You can get there by typing obesity news into your browser, just putting your email address in. If you go do that right now, in fact, then you will likely get the email that we send out today that will have this included in it. But in this is a report that went along with a press release from the FDA about the creation of a green list of bulk ingredients for GLP-1 compounds that basically creates a list of API sources, API meaning active pharmaceutical ingredient. So where does the Tirzepatide come from? Where does the Semaglutide come from? So let's talk first about safety, because the FDA is being very blunt in their reporting of this in the public comments that Marty Makary has had, and that is that compounds are not FDA approved. You may not know that, but that's sort of what allows these things to exist, is the fact that they operate outside of direct FDA regulations. They're not FDA approved. In some cases, they're copies during times of shortage. In some cases, they're personalized medicine. But in all cases, the active pharmaceutical ingredient is coming from somewhere. And the FDA has identified that there are some serious problems with some of the sourcing of these medications. As Dr. Makary said, and I agree, that Americans should be confident that the prescription drugs that they take are safe, compound or not. I'm adding that part. And they are taking aggressive action to protect consumers from poor quality or dangerous GLP-1s, potentially dangerous GLP-1s. We're going to get into it, but compounded drugs obviously have some framework around them. And we talked about how they can be used in times of shortages to help alleviate supply. Those shortages have been ended, whether you agree with them or not, is sort of a moot point. Now all the compounders have moved to this idea of personalized medicine, custom doses, custom formulations, which allow these compounds to exist outside of a shortage. So in terms of safety, what this report outlines and what the green list establishes is basically a way to ensure that the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient coming into these compound pharmacies, is from a legit source. The quality of these medications is something that we need to be concerned about. So this conversation about this list that came out has really been taking place around the topic of accessibility. And to me, accessibility is one of the most important topics that we talk about. When we talk about compounded medication from the patient perspective, it's certainly not the only or even the most important topic of conversation. The quality and the safety of these is huge too. So the creating of this green list of bulk ingredients sort of came from this idea that many of these API sources have been inspected. In fact, 72% of all the FDA enforcement actions against API sites hit manufacturers that only supply compounders. You heard me right. 72% of their enforcement actions have taken place against API manufacturers outside of the pharmaceutical industry and with specifically compound medication API sources, even though compounds account for just 18% of the market. Many of those violative actions and sites have actually been in India and China. So you can kind of see how this is a hard thing to regulate. So the FDA is urging pharmacies to know their suppliers and to verify that every lot of semaglutide or tirzepatide that they use has been tested for identity and purity. Now, hopefully that's all happening. But again, this happens largely outside of FDA regulation. And so the establishment of the green list is to basically establish medication sources that are cut off from ever entering the country. In other words, if you're on the green list, you're good. Those APIs can be imported and used in compounding. If you're not on the green list, meaning you are not approved by the FDA, it shouldn't, theoretically, shouldn't get the chance to even cross the border. So what does this ultimately mean? I think it means safer medication when you're talking about compounding, because the FDA is finding a way to identify who these companies are that are the sort of good actors in the API world, supplying trustworthy medication to people who are taking compounds. So overall, I think that it positively impacts the safety and the quality of these medications, provided that your pharmacy isn't trying to find some sort of workaround. Now, on the accessibility side, a little bit different. Pricing side, a little bit different. So more oversight typically means higher costs. Why? Because there could be hundreds of API sources that won't make that green list. So that could theoretically mean for some compounders, the API. And it also creates a less competitive market in terms of if there are only a few suppliers that people can get the API from, there's not as much competition on price. So what will that mean for patients? Ultimately, it could mean that the days of cheap compounds, are in peril, because ultimately there's more regulation on the source of the API. So ultimately, it could mean more expensive compounds if you're going to these sources that are using the green list for their API sources. So we'll have to see how that ultimately affects things. But again, more oversight typically means higher cost, and the addition of the in-house testing. If people are complying with the FDA's guidelines here, more testing could ultimately increase the cost. Now, I know a lot of the compounders out there, including the 503B, some of them that we know, would say, we're doing all this stuff already. This is for the bad actors. So for those, in those cases, it shouldn't really affect a whole lot. But again, some of the maybe less savory actors in the compounding world should get sort of weeded out by, I think, some of this regulation. Now, in terms of the supply in the near term, could this potentially lead to a choppier supply of compounded medications? In other words, if a supplier isn't on the green list or gets caught, trying to import medication and it gets held up, that flow of API slows down. So if there's a reduction in the flow of API into the compounders over time, this should lead to stability. But at the beginning, as some of these, less favorable actors in the market have some actions taken against them at the border with importing API, you could see a reduced supply. But ultimately, hopefully what you're seeing on the flip side of that coin is a safer supply. So hopefully this leads to more secure supply chain, but it will be interesting to see how this sort of weeds out some of the less savory actors in the compounding world. Right now, patients should prepare potentially for some disruptions and talk to their doctors and make backup plans, have maybe some other options on hand if you rely on compounded versions. Ultimately, I don't think anything's going to dry up overnight or anything's going to change super meaningfully. But I think with increased scrutiny and increased regulation in API source, I would expect that to impact the availability and the cost to some degree. How that all plays out, I don't pretend to know, but I do think these are all things that we need to be watching and not just saying, hey, the FDA just rubber stamped compounds. Now, I do think, and I've been on record multiple times over this last week saying, I believe that compounded medications are here to stay. I believe that these moves that are being made by the FDA seem to be indicative of an FDA that wants to regulate this better, not eliminate that, not to get rid of personalized medication, not to overly scrutinize prescriptions for patients that are written on a personalized or individualized basis, but that there needs to be more scrutiny in the process and there needs to be ultimately greater safety. So I think this is ultimately a good move towards, just better patient access to this. Maybe you'll see some of the doctors that have been hesitant over time to maybe start to get on board with these compounded versions, knowing that there is some level of scrutiny being done at the FDA level on the source of the API. I know that the Obesity Action Coalition, one of the big things that I talked about on an interview that I did with Joe Naglowski, who's the president CEO of the Obesity Action Coalition, was one of the reasons they couldn't put a stamp on compounds is that they couldn't ever verify the source of the API. And until they felt like they could do that in a meaningful way, they couldn't recommend it for people. Not that they had a stance against people that took them, but as an organization. So I do wonder how this changes that. And I invite Joe to come back and have that conversation with me. And I'm sure he will at some point. So compounds have been obviously a lifeline for many of you in the On the Pen community, many of you on GLP-1, but it's also a pathway that has had, some inherent risk because of the lack of oversight. And I think transparency matters. So I would be asking your pharmacy, if you ask me, Dave, what can we do about this? I'd be asking your pharmacy, where does the API come from? Are you using a green listed manufacturer? And are you testing each lot? You want to make sure that not only are you getting safe medicine, I think that's obvious, but I think for many people, they go, is this stuff even potent? Does it work? I've heard a lot of stories from people who have been on compound and they're like, I may as well just been injecting water. I don't want to discount those experiences and paint this all with rose-colored glasses like compounding is just this universally equal experience for every patient that takes them. It's not. And hopefully this green list is a move towards more, more regulation and ultimately more stability in the supply as it relates to its safety and its potency. So I think this is an important thing to watch. I think it's also sort of an acknowledgement on the FDA's part that if these are coming in from API sources that are green listed, that you can very well trust that these medications are not knockoff or bootleg. They are more along the lines of a copy of what is made by the pharmaceutical companies, though they are not subject to all the same stringent FDA guidelines. So glad to see some framework put around this. I think that is ultimately a really positive thing and a step in the right direction. And we can't really talk about safe access to medication without talking about our main sponsor here on the podcast, Ro. You can get access to a doctor through the Ro platform, their seamless platform, and that doctor will discuss with you the conditions that you have, the issues that you have, and introduce you potentially to the Ro Body program, where patients lose 15 to 20% of their body weight in a year when coupling these medications, when appropriately prescribed, with lifestyle modifications. Patients see tremendous success on the Ro Body program. And ro.co/OTP is sort of the gateway where you can go learn about what they're doing at Ro and learn more about the medications in general, especially like side effects. You want to know, if I'm going to take a new medication, how's it going to affect me? Visit ro.co/OTP. All that is within a couple clicks. Learn more about the Ro Body program and thank Ro while you're there for being an avid supporter of On the Pen and the work that we do here at On the Pen. Now, this I've been really excited to bring to you because this has been bantied around in the news, and this is directly from the OTP community in terms of we were the first sort of advertiser to bring the fact that Claimable is helping patients fight insurance denials. Up to 90% of insurance denials are never fought. And Claimable now has the framework to help patients fight that for a very meager fee, of which you can save 10% by using code OTP10. But Claimable is sort of behind this CVS Caremark class action lawsuit that you've been hearing about in the news. So I thought, what better to do than to bring them directly to you? Let's hear from Claimable today on more about what this lawsuit entails, how you can get involved, and what is ultimately the needle that we're hoping to move with all this. Over this past week, we have brought you some news about members of the community who are binding together to fight against these insurance denials for their Zepbound, especially as it relates to the CVS Caremark fiasco, where patients are being forced off Zepbound onto Wegovy. We introduced you to a company called Claimable, and Claimable is helping patients, including many patients in the OTP community, to fight back against that. And some were successful, and others were really struggling to get straight answers out of CVS Caremark. And in some cases, patients felt that their rights were being violated by CVS Caremark. And Claimable helped to organize these folks who were hitting a dead end, and there has been a class action lawsuit filed. And now I wanted to bring you into the fold on this conversation because this is sort of an evolving story. Some people want to get involved. Some people want to know more about what's going on. And I figured what better to do than bring on somebody from Claimable to discuss what's going on exactly. So today we have Alicia Graham, who is actually the co-founder and chief operating officer of Claimable. And Alicia is going to come in and just tell us a little bit more about what's going on. Alicia, welcome to On the Pen.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Of course, we had the rare opportunity to meet in person just a few weeks ago. So here we are now meeting virtually again. Alicia is out on the West Coast. I'm, of course, in Iowa. So I appreciate you working with the time difference to be here with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So let's get into this because I know a lot of people in this community are very interested in what's going on. Tell us a little bit about what's going on with this class action lawsuit. Like how is Claimable even involved in this?
Yeah, I mean, so where we got involved was really in recognizing the pattern of what we saw as likely misconduct. So we started helping patients file appeals, a lot of them involving, the forced switch, who got those letters from CVS Caremark, the notices, then tried to file a prior authorization to get back on Zepbound or stay on Zepbound, and were denied. Many of them then either appealed through their provider or started appealing on their own. So we started helping patients file appeals, and we quickly noticed something pretty alarming, which was that all the denials were identical. That they were ignoring important medical details, like if a patient had previously tried and failed Wegovy, they were offering alternatives that were off-label, like Mounjaro, and stating that that was medically necessary, while Zepbound was not medically necessary, which seems to kind of not make much sense.
Right.
And in general, it just didn't seem to align with the health plan policies that we were seeing, the FDA guidelines we were seeing, and the clinical evidence. So when we realized that it wasn't just kind of a few bad decisions and we were really struggling to get the successes that we typically do, we knew we had to do something more. So working with some of the patients where we saw this really egregious behavior happening that really wanted to keep fighting, and our legal advisor, Brian Hufford, who's of the Hufford law firm, we brought this evidence to a class action law firm called Berger Montague, and they kind of put together this lawsuit. So on September 3rd, they filed the class action lawsuit against CVS Caremark on behalf of all patients whose Zepbound coverage was wrongfully denied, and whose appeals were rejected based on medical necessity.
I love that. First of all, I love Claimable. I love what you all do. And so it's always an honor to have anybody from Claimable here on the podcast and to have you all supporting what we're doing now. I love that you guys didn't just take no for an answer when you started seeing these denials come back, and that these denials were unfair, not acknowledging sort of the medical case that you were helping these patients to bring. I just love that you didn't leave it there. Now, that said, a lawsuit for the sake of a lawsuit is like pretty unproductive in my mind. What is it about this? Like, how will it actually play out in a way that could impact patients? Because there's detractors that will, of course, say that's just going to make the cost of premiums go up. Like, how does this impact patients that are on these medications?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, any patient who qualifies based on when the class gets certified, what that definition is. What's being asked for in the lawsuit are two kinds of relief. One is injunctive relief. So that's important because that is asking for CVS Caremark to change their policies, and it is possible for there to be a ruling on that in a quicker time frame.
So
The other category.
Just to pause you, when you talk about injunctive relief, and I'm thinking in terms of people who just don't speak this kind of language, are you saying ultimately that you're kind of going right at the heart of the Novo deal with CVS Caremark that's causing this forced switch to begin with?
Yeah, so it's really the kinds of violations we're seeing. So the systemic denials that are all kind of the same and not taking individual cases into consideration, which it isn't aligned with federal laws, in our view. The kind of ongoing, just sort of forced switch, all of that, those are the kinds of things that are in that injunctive relief, asking them to change those policies. So that would affect people both going forward, and there is an ask to review all past denials as well. So that's kind of that piece, which is about change, the way you're working. If it's found to be that is indeed, not following the laws. The other area is what's called other appropriate equitable relief. And so this could be monetary relief that is whatever that is deemed by the court, to sort of make people whole for the harms that they have endured and continue to endure.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot about patients who maybe got to a certain weight with Zepbound, a certain amount of weight off. And of course, the goal with these medications is to reduce the BMI. If you're using one drug effectively and then you lose progress, like how do you even qualify that? Because for many people, it's not just the thousands of dollars that they spent on the medication to get this level of progress that they were, looking for. It's the time that it took to get there and all of that. And so I think that's great that people will at least try to be made whole. Now, on that topic, I know there's probably a lot of people watching that are like, well, I had this happen to me at CVS Caremark. Like, is there a way for somebody who has been impacted by this to sort of get in on this class action lawsuit?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think one thing to note about class action lawsuits is that so maybe even just backing up a little bit and kind of like the timeline of these things. So the first stage now is we filed the suit. There will be another suit's already been filed. There will likely be many more. The CVS Caremark will likely have a motion to dismiss. But if that, it still moves forward, there's class certification. And so at that time, however they define the class, if you qualify based on that definition, then you're just in the class. You'll start to receive notifications at some point letting you know that you've qualified and asking you to kind of sign up. So there's nothing you really need to do now. We'll be putting out, a newsletter to help people follow along. But I think right now the thing to note is just to kind of pay attention to what the class certifications are. I can tell you that in this suit that we're talking about, Larkin versus CVS Caremark, that class was defined as people who had been denied Zepbound for any, indicate for weight loss and any of the other comorbidities. But it did state that they also tried to appeal, and it was upheld upon appeal. So it's important to know that is the definition. There are the other suit that's out there, that one's looking at just people who have obstructive sleep apnea that were denied because of the fact that only Zepbound is FDA indicated for that. But that one's also only limited to CVS Caremark and Care First, which is like in the DC, Maryland area. So paying attention to what these definitions are, that'll all get sorted out. It'll then go into discovery. There'll be summary judgment, and somewhere along the way, they'll also figure out what damages are.
Okay, so we're talking about like quite a process that takes place, but to the original question about how you get involved, ultimately, if you fit the criteria, there will probably be some sort of correspondence with that person at some point down the line.
Yeah. And at this point, I'd say one thing you can do if you have not done so already is you should appeal to make sure, because there are some sort of procedural laws whereby you're not really allowed to sue unless you have appealed. So I think it's important to make sure that you've taken that step. That would be one thing you could do now.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know even where to begin on that, you can start by calling your insurance company, and they can sort of walk you through the process of how to appeal that, or Claimable, for a very nominal fee, will actually help you build a case that actually probably increases your chance quite a bit of getting that the ultimate goal of getting the medication. Because I think at the end of the day, people are like, whatever, I don't care about a lawsuit, I just want my medicine.
Yeah.
So what, this is kind of outside the scope of the conversation about the appeal, but like I know that of this lawsuit, but tell me, Claimable had like an 80% track record, I think, going into helping with GLP-1 appeals with some of the other areas that you focus on. Based upon what you were expecting to see from CVS Caremark, I don't know that it was necessarily 80% or not, but based upon what you were expecting to see, were there more or less denials than you expected?
There were a lot more.
A lot
So,
more.
and in particular, when we originally did, the first level appeal, and the rates of denial were much higher than we've seen in any of the other areas that we focus on. And so that's why we started moving to help people file second appeals for free. And we did see some improvement there. We also, because we're looking across the market, we looked at what was in the denials, and we started preemptively addressing that. So evolving our appeal strategy. That included adding a legal opinion in every second appeal, and even some of those sort of arguments in every first appeal, to really address what we saw as a lot of these violations. And we did see a doubling of our success rate through some of those efforts. So it's been getting better. But I think the other thing I haven't said that I think should be said about the importance of a lawsuit, and many lawsuits out there, is that it also sends a message. It sends a message that people are going to hold them accountable. It sends a message that we're going to challenge these unjust denials. And we hope that, not only CVS Caremark sees that, but other PBMs see that might be looking at this and considering adopting similar behaviors, similar policies. And also there has been in the past, just recently in 2021, CVS Caremark did something similar where they asked 150,000 patients to switch from a blood thinner drug, Eliquis, sorry. And I will just say there that because of public pressure, because of the many harms that patients experienced, and the fact that that was in the public eye because people weren't letting it go, CVS reversed course after 6 months. And so the other thing I think that's important about these lawsuits is that we're making it really hard for them to unjustly say no, to systemically say no when they shouldn't be, when there's no cause. And we're hoping that can change policy much sooner than a class action lawsuit can play out.
I love that. I hope that's the case. And again, I just love that you didn't just like accept that the company was, denying these at a higher clip than they do other drugs, and that you're fighting back. I obviously hope that this is wildly successful and sort of catches fire with these other PBMs that are doing similar things, knocking people off of their medication. I find the sleep apnea one especially egregious, as you pointed out. It's the only medicine that's approved for sleep apnea. So where are you going to go from there?
Yeah.
And this has never been a 1-for-1 swap. You're talking about one drug that works on 2 hormones and another drug that works on a different hormone. And even though they have, maybe comparable outcomes in clinical trials, one is clearly superior to the other. So this is amazing. Love it. If you are somebody who needs to file that appeal, get claimable.com/OTP. And if you use the code OTP10, you'll save 10%. But even the fee, which is, I think, somewhere around $40, is pretty reasonable when you consider, you have a shot at getting your medication covered and what that means for every individual financially. I know that within the On the Pen community, I hear, just about every other day, somebody sending me a message and they're like, hey, I used that Claimable thing and I got my medicine back, which is amazing for me to hear, because that's been the hope. Is there a number that you're seeing that you're comfortable with sharing in terms of like how many people are being successful? Do you have that off the top of your head, or could you get that to us?
It really varies. I mean, if I put aside the CVS Caremark issue, we're definitely, it's not quite at that 80%, but we're certainly winning more than we're losing. So, and it's improving all the time. So I think that's
over 50%. Yeah. And that doesn't surprise me based upon the feedback that I've gotten from the community that people are being successful. And of course, yeah, you do appeals outside of just the CVS Caremark issue. If you've lost access to your GLP-1 for any reason, they've sent you a denial, you can fight it. And one of the most eye-opening things that was shared with me right away that blew my mind, I think maybe it was either you or Warris who shared this with me, that it's something like 90% of all denials aren't even fought. So the fact that Claimable is giving you the framework to fight back and know even where to begin, and it's done for a very reasonable fee, in my opinion, considering the cost of these medications and everything that you're pulling together and everyone that's being brought into the loop on this. I love what you're doing at Claimable. Get claimable.com/OTP, code OTP10 saves 10%. Anything else that you want to add, Alicia, before I cut you loose?
No, I think we covered it all. I would just reinforce that always appeal if you feel you've been unjustly denied, because that's the reason why the denial rate is rising, is because not enough people fight back.
Yeah. And I love that Claimable is giving patients a voice. Love it. Thank you for being with me, Alicia. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's Alicia from Claimable. Appeal. Sometimes you see she was wearing that hat, says appeal. I wear that hat sometimes too. 90% of insurance denials are not appealed, and Claimable just gives you the framework to do all that. The coolest thing about them, and then I'll move on, but the coolest thing about Claimable is that they literally build a legal case, a medical case, and they're fighting fire with fire. Your appeals are often denied with AI. They're helping leverage AI tools to build out that denial appeal for you. And they're making sure that it gets delivered to all the interested parties, even including your legislators when appropriate, but your employer, the insurance company, your doctor, all of that. It's just a wonderful resource for patients. And I'm so glad that they partnered with us at OTP, and really thankful that Alicia gave us some time to the stream today. Moving on, because there's still so much to get to, a couple of really exciting things that happened in the world of Novo and Lilly, because we do still talk about what's going on with them here. But yeah, just some interesting stuff that's going on with both of those companies. So this past week, we saw a partnership that Novo Nordisk made with a company called Novo Novonesis, or I don't know, who knows how you say any of these words. But this is a really interesting one because it's focusing on, or Novonesis is focusing on gut health. So when we talk about GLP-1s or GIP or glucagon, when we talk about these sort of hormones in our body, there are hormones that are released in response to nutrient intake. So ultimately we call them noosh stimulated hormones, like nutrient stimulated hormones. And what we found is there's dysregulation in a lot of these hormones that are made in your gut. And so gut health is sort of like when we get to root cause medicine of why is that signaling broken between the gut and the brain, it's gut health. It's gut health. And we've had CEOs from companies that are working on, helping to restore the gut. But this partnership with Novo and Novonesis is interesting because it focuses on symbiotic supplements like probiotics and prebiotics that are designed to improve markers like blood sugar and cholesterol and metabolic health. And they're also improving some of the biomarkers that predict long-term health outcomes, sort of spotting risk in obesity before diabetes sets in. So it's a proactive way to manage metabolic health. Novo is betting that gut bacteria will be one day as important as your prescription pad, right? Having a healthy gut, which I love because I want to get to the root cause and how do we avoid the next generation getting to the point that this generation is in. So imagine your doctor, at a younger age, recommending a probiotic blend to sort of lower your risk of obesity or diabetes before it even starts. And so I love to see Novo Nordisk jumping into root cause medicine. And not to be outdone, Lilly made a huge partnership that was announced today as well. And this is a partnership with a company called Remedium Bio Therapy. So Lilly, we've talked about this several times over the last couple of weeks, both Lilly and Novo making investments in the future of obesity care with gene therapy. So the idea is that with this partnership, you would have maybe a dose adjustable single injection that could last years, that could potentially replace the weekly GLP-1 shots that are made from, long chains of amino acids, and hopefully something that would be more durable and potentially cheaper for patients. So this is a really exciting partnership to watch because, again, getting into these sort of genetic reasons that people develop obesity, and how do we interrupt that before people get to these certain metabolic states that are less reversible or harder to reverse, these more serious levels of disease. And so the future of these medications, which is the flip side to the conversation that we have about cost and accessibility and PBMs and rebates and drug price costs compared to the rest of the world, all of this tends to go back to the idea of innovation and not wanting to stifle innovation for people who current therapies, not only in obesity, treat, but other disease avenues as well. So I think this is an important topic of conversation. And listen, while we're on the topic of sort of long-term health and managing your health and being preemptive and proactive, I do want to shout out our sponsor, Shapa, who has continued to help me to stay on my journey. The Shapa scale is the scale that's actually designed for people like you and me, people who have been victimized by the scale throughout our life living with obesity. And the Shapa actually changes the way we track our health. Instead of focusing in on that daily number, it helps us focus in on a pattern. And we want to stay in the pattern of weight loss. We don't want to get sidetracked or derailed by these day-to-day fluctuations. So no numbers, just colors to track your health trends. It's looking at things like your water weight and your body composition and using that algorithmically to help you stay in a color-coded pattern that is simple and has a way of helping you stay engaged with your health. Listen, when I'm engaged with the scale, it means I'm engaged with my health. And so Shapa helps me to stay engaged with the scale. Check them out at myshapa.com/OTP. Use code OTP30. It's going to save you 30% on the Shapa scale. And if you're a medical provider that has a practice, this is a wonderful tool, in my opinion, for patients living with obesity, especially if they've lived their whole life with obesity and have that trepidation about stepping on the scale each day. Keeps us engaged with our health. myshapa.com/OTP. Use code OTP30 to save 30%. Love what they're doing at Shapa. That's what I got for you this week. I thank you for being here and thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen. If you found this video helpful, please like, save, share, send to a friend, hit the subscribe button below. And if you could jump over and follow our Instagram account, we're trying to get to 20,000 followers over on Instagram. We are there. Check out our link tree. We're going to link a bunch of stuff in our link tree today. So make sure that you check that out, all in the description of the podcast. Thank you for being the best part of what we do here at On the Pen. I wouldn't, and shouldn't do it without you. This Thursday, as a housekeeping note, we will be reintroducing our On the Pen live show. It will be recorded early Thursday, played Thursday night. So Thursday night, 7 p.m. is what we got slated. Thank you for those who gave feedback on the Substack this week. You picked the day and you picked how we're doing it. So thank you for doing that. Really looking forward to bringing On the Pen live back and meeting with you in the chat while we all converse and go over the fun things of the week in obesity medicine. Thanks for being here. We'll catch you on the next.